economy by cutting red tape, letting us build things again in America. So these are just a few things. The other thing is, how do we get people back into the workforce, right? So we're only talking about, in work requirements, able-bodied people who have no dependents. Should we borrow money from China to pay people who are able-bodied with no dependents to sit on a couch? I don't think so, because we have found every study, it takes people off poverty rolls and puts them into jobs. It gives them a sense of worth. They're able to buy a house. They're able to send their kids to college. It's a very positive American thing. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, do the
Americans need to do anything to prepare for the potential of default? There are a lot of people worried about what could happen to their jobs, their savings, and so forth. Do Americans need to get ready for that potential?
No. Because the Republicans had passed a bill that raised the debt ceiling that's sitting in the Senate. You always have the ability to move that. There's always opportunity. Yes.
Two questions. One, how would you describe the tone of the conversation tonight between you and the president?
I think the tone tonight was better than any other time we've had discussions. I'll have Chairman Patrick McHenry come up and talk a little bit about that as well, but I felt it was productive because, look, we both know, we've walked through this for a long time, where our differences, we're explaining them, we're giving a give and take of what we think would be best for moving the country forward. We still will have some philosophical differences, but I felt it was productive in that manner, in the manner in which we produced, and I think we were able to really focus on the areas that's different. Patrick here has been in the meetings with the White House staff the whole time, and I think the meetings you have had have been professional and productive too. You want to say?
Look, we've had a variety of meetings at our level for the last at our level since Tuesday, Wednesday of this past week, and then much longer to get that ready. We've had tough meetings. We've had difficult meetings. This meeting was productive. It told us, as the negotiating team, a little more of the details we need to get to a package that can pass Congress. But to hear the Speaker and the President air their views directly with one another, no acrimony, but it was productive, and it was a meaningful discussion and helpful to us getting a construct that can protect everyone's equities.
It's totally productive, but are you confident that you can get a deal with enough time left to prevent Americans from feeling the economic pain here?
Look, the thing I want to tell America, I never wanted to be here. I do not like the idea that you govern by chaos, you govern by a deadline. So all the way back in January, I requested meetings with the president after I won Speaker, only on this issue. We always knew this issue was coming. February 1st, I got that meeting, and I sat with the president. I told him, Mr. President, we should work together to find where we could have common ground to raise the debt ceiling, but curve our spending so we stop doing this. And I told the president, there's only two things. Not going to raise taxes, and we're not going to pass a clean debt ceiling. But for 97 days, he said he wouldn't meet with me. And now, what the Republicans went and did in the House, we passed a bill that raised the debt ceiling, saved us money, put us on a trajectory where we could go to balance. This was long before Secretary Yellen told us the deadline was June 1st, because we don't want to govern that way. Unfortunately, denying our ability to meet put us in this situation. I believe we can still get there. I believe we can get it done. Look, I've watched us work before. I think from this discussion, he knows where we are. We had greater explanation of. He had to be at G7 while our staffs were meeting. We were able to explain where some positions they have. I think that was a better explanation for both sides.
How long should these spending caps last, and would they include defense spending?
Well, when you look at spending caps and think about what we pass in Limit, Save, Grow, we don't say each year we have government growing by 1%. That was an idea by Joe Manchin. And so what we look at, when you get elected to Congress, we decide, just like in a household, if you make $100 a week, you decide your priorities where you spend that money. That's what we would do once we get the spending caps or the top line dollar figure of how much we'll spend. Now, since the Democrats went into power, they've increased almost $6 trillion. That brought us inflation, brought us these challenges. But so the president's budget wants to spend more money than we spent at the height of COVID. We shouldn't do that. So it is easy for us to spend it less than we spent last year, or this year, but only in Washington is that's difficult, and that's our strict challenge.
But are defense cuts on the table?
No. Defense, when you're sitting, the president was just at G7 talking about the fear and the challenge of what China's doing. We watched what's happening in Ukraine. We've watched the amount of weaponry we had to provide to Ukraine. We don't want to make America in a threatening position. So no, defense should not be on the table. It's a responsibility. I'm a person who believes in limited government, and it is a responsibility of those to make sure we have the defense of this nation, and that would be a mistake.
Did the president agree to make any concessions, Mr. Speaker?
Three-day rule, given that this has to pass the House, has to pass the Senate, we're 9 days out. Is that something that you're looking at?
Looking to do something?
To waive the 3-day
No, I'm not going to waive the 3-day rule because we have the 3-day rule for a reason. You lend your voice to your elected officials. You want to make sure they have their voice. If you want to move a bill such as this, and I know in past Congresses under Speaker Pelosi it was different, they would move trillions of dollars in a day and nobody could read the bill. I'm not going to be afraid of what the agreement comes in the end. Because I would sit that bill down and I would give everybody 72 hours so everybody knows what they're voting on. The American public knows. Yes.
Is there a drop-dead date where you need to have a deal in order to get it through the House and the Senate?
Look, I've always felt, looking back before, we should already be here. And as I told you, I've never wanted to be here. All of my actions from the day I became Speaker was to try to make sure we weren't here. Unfortunately, we went 97 days where people said they wouldn't talk to us. We went more than 100 days, said you couldn't negotiate on this. We're finally at that point. Had we started this in February, we could have been done long before the deadline.
Where did you leave it? Are you meeting tomorrow? Or
Well, we instructed Chairman McHenry and others and in the White House to come back together based upon our discussions in the room and try to find where we can get to common ground there. Yes.
The president was just like 90 minutes ago. He was talking about loopholes and people who make up to $400,000 a year. You're telling me that new revenue is totally off the table?
Were you here earlier? So I don't want to repeat myself, but in the 50 years of how much money government has brought in, we normally bring in 17% of GDP. So we're bringing in almost 20%. Only 2 times in the modern history of this country, 1944 and 2000, have we ever brought in this higher percent. And it's more money than ever before. So if I ran my household where I brought in more money than ever before, but I owe more money than I make in my entire year, I don't think it's a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. It's the same thing with government, because for 50 years in government, we normally only spend 21% of GDP. But when the Democrats took over, they raised that up to more than 24%. We've never spent this high, and it's going to 25. So if you don't tackle the problems that have created, you're never going to solve it. So the answer to your question again that asked earlier is no, we're not looking at revenues, and if you think to put some type of taxes would only hurt our economy for one. Secondly, we're already in a challenge where they raise so much inflation based upon their spending. That would be a stupid thing to do. And you really need to tackle the real problem. Look, I've always tried to explain. To me, a debt ceiling is providing your child a credit card. They hit the limit. And year after year, all you did was raise the limit. You did nothing about their spending. And all of a sudden, you owe more on the credit card than you make the entire year. Because our debt, we owe more than the size of our economy by 20%. So should you just raise the debt limit again? Is it so arcane to say, should we look at where we're spending if we're spending higher than we average do in 50 years? Should it be arcane that we pull money back that we appropriated during COVID but wasn't spent? Is it odd to show that in our history when we have work requirements, we help more people get jobs and that helps Social Security and Medicare because more people are paying in? Is it odd that we say we should be energy independent so you lower the price of energy, which helps lower inflation, that makes us less dependent on China? I don't think we're in a weird place here. It's odd that only in Washington you have to fight so hard to make this a reality, and that's what we're talking about.
Mr. Speaker, can you say with confidence that you trust President Biden and the Democrats that they want to make a deal?
I think they want to make a deal, but what we've watched time and again and why we're in this problem, every deal they want to make in the past only meant they wanted to make a deal about spending more money. at the time of just spending more money in America in government is wrong. And you as taxpayers should say the same thing. You as taxpayers, it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. It's coming out of your pocket. Every new child that was born today just got a $94,000 bill, and they're 1 day old. I think that's wrong. I think we're failing in that problem. And you know what? You can blame both sides for this, but that has got to stop, and it's got to end now. And this is more. I don't want you to think at the end of the day, the bill that we come up with is going to solve all this problem, but it's going to be a step to finally acknowledge our problem and put one step in the right direction. And we're going to come back the next day and get the next step.
Mr. Speaker, is there any
What
chance?
areas, if any, did you guys find agreement on today?
Look, I think we both agree we want to be able to come to an agreement. We both agree on the areas that we know there's disagreement on, but I think it was productive in the professionalism, the honesty with one another, and the desire to try to find common ground.
Mr. Speaker.
Where did you leave work requirements? Are they still on the table?
Look, there's nothing agreed to. Everything's being talked about.
Mr. Speaker.
Some House Republicans say they won't accept anything less than the House-backed bill. Can you assure them of that?
Well, look, we passed a House-backed bill when no one else would talk to us. We know we've got to get something through the Senate. We've got to get the president to sign. So the way the founders designed this government, you got a House, you got a Senate. Normally, if they both pass a bill, you go to conference. Unfortunately, the senators never did anything. Chuck Schumer never put a bill on the floor. And if you were able to do that, we would be in a stronger position. But we're carrying the weight, and we're discussing that. And I think at the end of the day, you're going to have compromise.
The president again, sir. When are you going to talk to the president again?
Well, I believe, and Patrick could come back on this as well, they're going to come back together, work through the night, and see if the president and I, look, we know the deadline. I think the president and I are going to talk every day to try to find until we get this done.
Mr. Speaker, is there any chance of a short-term extension?
Look, I don't think a short-term extension benefits anybody. We're this where we're at. If it's a short-term extension, I think the country looks at somehow we failed, that we can't do the job we're supposed to do. I think a lot of people on the other side are probably looking back and wishing they didn't deny talking to one another for those 97 days. I know in our own household, that's not what we do. Even though I disagree with somebody, but we know we've got to work together. We know you're the president, you're the Senate, we're the House. We may have different positions, but if we talk together, I think we could find a way to solve this problem. Not talking for 97 days have put us in this problem. I wish that never happened.
Mr. Speaker, you've talked about capping spending at fiscal year 22. I believe the latest proposal is for 6 years with 1% spending increases. The White House has talked about capping it at fiscal year 23. Was there any movement on that specifically? Have they moved? Have you guys moved from your position?
So the Speaker's been very clear. We need to spend less money next year than we did this year. There's no gamesmanship here. He's said the same thing in the room that he said here. He's been very clear. We have a position. We've passed it out of the House. The president, for days, for weeks, for months, demanded we pass a product. We passed a product. We're here negotiating. He sent his team to Capitol Hill to go negotiate this deal. You want to get into all the details of it, but no details resolved until it's all resolved.
Has there been any movement? Are you still talking about
Look,
6 years?
I will tell you there is a productive conversation by the teams that are in the room, and no one's going to agree to anything until we have a finalized deal. We got very good direction from the Speaker and from the President, the Speaker to his team, the President to his team, in the same room. We're on the same page. We have the same set of issues we've got to work through. It was productive. It was honest. And the teams in the room have built some level of relationship and trust that we can actually get a product that is mutually agreeable to. These are tough issues, though. Make no bones about it. A directive to cut spending year over year is the toughest thing to do in Washington, D.C. But that is the Speaker's directive to his negotiating team. It is our expectation to be able to get that.
Sir, one more question, if I may, for you.
Yes, okay.
What do you simply tell Americans watching this all unfold tonight at home? Their kids and grandkids, and they see the debt pile growing by the years, trillions and trillions more. What do you tell them who worry their kids and grandkids will ultimately pay the price one day for this?
Well, this is fundamentally what this discussion is about. When you have a debt ceiling, you have to take stock of the fiscal house. You have to take stock of spending. When Democrats were in charge of the House with the last president, they negotiated for higher spending. We have a Republican House and a Republican Speaker who've said we have to cut spending because the next generation cannot bear this debt load. That is the fundamental discussion point here. that we're trying to resolve, and is very sticky, very difficult, because there's up and there's down, and unfortunately the middle ground here is something that is not acceptable to either party.
And the one thing I will say, look, the individuals the president asked to negotiate are the most professional I've ever seen. They're intelligent, they're professional, they're respectful, and I think that has been productive. If we had only been able to be here 97 days ago, we wouldn't be here. We'd all be done.
Mr. Speaker, have you both then, in saying that this ultimately will be bipartisan, accepted that you're going to lose votes from the far left and the far right on final passage?
Did you ever think at the end of the day that when you get into a negotiation with both sides that only one side is going to carry everything? No. No one thinks that. But I would hope at the end of the day, when you would sit back and look that the Democrats said they would never negotiate, that it'd just be a clean debt ceiling, I think those in America would say, good job. You know what? It's not that. So when you talk to your grandchildren, what are you going to tell them? You know what? There's hope. There's hope because they finally woke up that they got a spending problem. There's hope because there's people who are willing to do something about it, but not just do something about it, but fight for them. So what I want to tell you, the American people, I will not give up on you. This won't solve all the problems, but this is the first step, and I'm going to come back the next day and get the next step. So I would hope that we could get everybody on both sides out to vote for it, to actually put their partisanship aside and think of the grandchildren. Think of that child born today that got a $94,000 bill. How can you sit there and say, oh, I'm going to spend more of their money? Let's stop that. Let's make this economy stronger. Let's take care of the debt that we acquired because we have a responsibility to pay it. And let's stop doing this by the deadline, worrying whether we're going to make it. We'll make better policy. Thank you very much.